Hi, welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about AI resilience, and especially for regulated entities. So we have representing the healthcare, finance, energy, and other kind of sectors because AI is so embedded in everything that we do that it's now part of our business process, and we need to make sure that it doesn't mess up. So we have some experts here on hand that I'll introduce in a minute, and we'll have a great discussion talk about this topic. So my name is Rick Doten. I am an AI and cybersecurity advisor, retired CISO, and I'm happy to be moderating this discussion today.
So Mark Orsi, I'm CEO of Global Resilience Federation. We help build, manage, and support ISACs and other collective defense communities.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vice President and CISO in residence here at Rubrik. However, as well, chair the ISSA.org Cyber Resilience Working Group with over 2,500 people, and I have a past as Deputy CISO and Head of Resilience in pharma, manufacturing, and as well banking.
And I'm a retired health plan CISO, so I can represent healthcare from that standpoint. So first, we're going to talk about like AI resiliency in general. We have defined resiliency in organizations. We have strive to protect not just our data and protect our assets, but also making sure that the uptime of our systems is is something that we can rely on. Because ironically, a lot of folks, particularly when we talk about healthcare, is that they think, oh, you're worried about protecting the healthcare information. And while that is certainly true, our biggest risk is that of availability of the data, so doctors can make decisions and keep people alive, that we can make sure we pay doctors so the hospital can stay in business, and that everyone has access to their information in a timely manner. And so anything that could disrupt that could be very much a critical business impact. So when we now have included AI into systems, into third-party platforms, into services that we're using, then we have this another element of the surface area that is now non-deterministic that we need to make sure is always going to be as reliable as what we were used to before. So that's kind of my perspective on it. I'll ask the other two gentlemen, like, so Mark, what's your perspective on AI resilience and its impact in our industries?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad we're having this conversation. I really feel like it is has not been a topic. People have been so worried about, how the threat actors are using AI, how the defenders are using AI, how your PII might be abused, how ethical considerations. Nobody has really talked about resilience as we build this into every business process and every SaaS application. Nobody's really considered resilience as part of their solution. So I think I define resilience, AI resilience, as the ability to continue delivering critical business services when AI is unavailable, it's degraded, it's manipulated, or it's no longer trusted, and then return to a validated state. We've defined an operational resilience framework that starts with critical functions, maps dependencies, establishes degrading operating modes, and assigns decision rights and test recovery. And then collective resilience extends that beyond one company to the providers, suppliers, sectors, and communities that share the same dependencies. And we just did, we had our third iteration of an AI disruption exercise that I'll talk about later. That's very interesting.
I love the definition that Mark just gave, so I will not give another one. I think I've been doing a lot of work with various framework authors, including NIST, MITRE, and others, and I will actually take something from that. So the ability to anticipate, withstand, recover, and evolve an organization didn't change drastically now with AI. Like AI obviously creates 100%, 100 more opportunities and 100 more risks as well. So the speed, as we know, is what makes many organizations fail. And at the core of every strong resilience program, and now with AI resilience programs as well, this still holds, is what do we need to protect? What is most critical? And oftentimes there's the thinking process I see across industries is that we need to protect, of course, data, and we need to protect the model, but that's not just that. We need to protect as well a few other layers. Importantly, the decision-making process in between is what is very difficult to identify what has gone wrong and then how to roll it back, right? So one last piece is when we look at the principles that need to be applied to any cyber resilience program, and now with AI resilience programs as well, these principles haven't drastically changed. In fact, there's a great article from Ron Ross, who is the godfather of resilience and engineering on resilience as we know today. The space sector is now approaching this. We may argue that is maybe one of the most advanced. And I looked in detail in there, and the principles are still more or less the same. It's not shocking me though. In fact, when even before talking about AI resilience, the discussions on resilience were seemingly like new concepts, but instead they were there at least from the 2000s, right? So I think we have a lot of catch up to do, and equally, I'm excited to be here.
And you bring up a good point in that we kind of have ignored resilience in general because, as Mark said, we like focus on the more exciting things, which is what can attackers do, what are new exploits, what are kind of new tools to be able to identify and respond to these things, but our regulations have always had these requirements of resiliency for the reasons that I've said, and in manufacturing, for every 10 minutes that line is not running and you're not making widgets, you know how much money you're losing. For any time that the electricity is out, you know what kind of impacts there are to others. So all of these different things are relying on things that are stable and ongoing. And while we have standards for these, they really the goals are still the same. AI has some uniquenesses to it in that, like we said, the non-deterministic way, and as you kind of mentioned, Francesco, to identify is a little different, because if we don't have not just observability but comprehension of how these things are working, we don't know like why did it break to be able to make sure it fixed. And so one of the other areas, and you had mentioned a couple of the standards and standards specifically around AI. NIST has them, and ISO has them, and even Cloud Security Alliance has a great framework, and OWASP. A lot of these, and we brought it up in the the Cloud Security Alliance Mythos paper, that they were devised before agents were really a thing. And so, with the exception of AIUC1 and SL5, that are specific agent frameworks and updates to NIST to look at agents, now that we're going to be, and we'll talk about this later, now that agents will be more of a thing in 2026, then that adds another layer to it. So my question is like, how are you seeing any regulatory response, any regulatory things that we need to do to support changing with AI, knowing that we haven't had like new yardsticks to measure against?
First of all, here in Europe, what we see is the AI Act, and there's definitely one of the requirements I like the most is the one that by end of summer, organizations that leverage AI systems, they will need to actually report what they use, right? And this means that you need to have a very good inventory of all things AI that you leverage, and then you will need to suddenly report it. This is, again, within the banking sector, for example, you got the European DORA, and there you got Article 8, which is already mentioning the identification of the critical processes. And if one of your critical processes now becomes suddenly run by AI, you will need to demonstrate that how much can you substitute the AI delivery layer of that business process with non-AI resources, right? This is a very risky practice that we see now. I think it was even marked in the tabletop exercise we ran recently, where many leaders actually were uncertain on how to do that. Imagine it, if you don't have any more humans operating a process, think about customer service for either a bank or a pharma company, whatever. There can be serious implications if suddenly the AI layer gets interrupted, for whatever layer we mean. It can be the tool layer, it can be the identity layer, the cognitive layer, or the data layer, or the decision layer. So that's one. The identification of what's most critical must be reported. It's governed very, very closely. And then we got the Article 11 and 12 from DORA again, but is equivalent to the NIS2 Article 21 for the continuity of your most critical services. Again, I think I like to think about it as an extension to what's already existing rather than a complete revolution. The revolution comes definitely on the risk that we have to handle now and the speed, right?
Yeah, I would just say too, I'm early days we were talking about an AI bill of materials, right, and the dependency mapping that you do. Like you need to worry about shadow AI in your own organization. How is it being used in different ways to support your business processes that you may or may not know. Uh, and but even more importantly, once you do know those dependency maps, we don't even realize how deeply maybe our third parties are utilizing AI. So this exercise was an interesting case where we worked with Google and Anthropic to design a plausible scenario where there was a systemic impact on AI, to where your third parties services started acting funny, right? Your internal applications started acting funny all at the same time. And could you even identify the problem? Could you then find the source of the problem? Could you respond and recover from it? Had you designed resilience into your systems to begin with? It was really forward thinking to really make people take a step back and say, hey, we haven't done any of this work yet. We need to do it. As we build this in our business processes, we need to make sure that we are building resilience into it, that maybe we're using multiple models, and we're able to make it portable between them. All of those things that you need to consider in order to make resilient systems. And the important thing too is that not just the speed and scale that these models can act upon, but the fact that you're really elevating things to the business process level, where it's not just at the technology layer, it's really up at the business process layer where you need to be monitoring to even understand if there's an impact. I may not see it at the technical layer at all. It may only be that I'm getting a strange service level.
Mark, you mentioned dependencies, right? And as we know, I mean, these are requirements. Within a risk management framework, we got the organization, then the business process for each unit, and then we got the system layer, and then we got the information asset layer. Then obviously people and identities. But even until now, without the AI additional risk that is being created and the opportunity, but even doing regular dependency maps for organizations, this is a key requirement from the UK financial sector, for example, from years now, at least 5 years minimum, I would say. I rarely saw, and I talked to many CXOs, I rarely saw a thorough dependency map. Oftentimes is a list. So first mistake, it must be ideally a visual or a knowledge graph, right? And now to be able to map, but not even to map, to maintain these dependency maps is super challenging. I believe there are no tools, and where I'm going with this is in light of lack of tools and even more lack of skills. Look at the NIST NICE framework, which defines all the knowledge states and tasks and basically almost job descriptions in a way that organizations need to adopt. This is the golden standard. So we can just think about the knowledge, so the standards, but the way how these get applied and reflected in operating models. And first of all, cyber resilience just was created sometime last year, and one of the few that were behind this, together with again Ron Ross, NIST, and Raytheon, and a few others from MITRE. And the AI skills as well just start to be introduced. So we have, it's not surprising that we are all handling these problems now, and we require much more than regulations. We require skills.
No, absolutely. And there's not enough people who know what they're doing to help everyone who needs help. And we've been talking about resilience in my CISO communities for the last 2 years, and that our job is not just make sure stuff is protected, but it's also running, which kind of seems obvious and kind of what we're talking about. But you both brought up some really good threads I want to go down. So the first one is on asset management, because we can't protect we don't know about, we can't restore or monitor what we don't know about. And yet AI is not a finite thing. When we talk about, I talk all the time on podcasts about, identifying agents. Agents are not one thing. It's not an executable I go search for. They are multiple things using shared infrastructure with other things, and you have to kind of enumerate it and then guess. And as you said, Mark, it's based on the business outcome of like, what is the business actually doing with this? And you brought up a good point, is that when AI non-deterministics fail, they fail in different ways. So everything is up and running, but it may not be producing quality output, and it may be drifting a little bit. And so do we have ways to even I see that? And so that changes our resiliency definition from up down, is it working or is it not, or is our performance, is it lagging, whatever, to it's working and it's responding quickly, but it's not actually accurate. So what are you seeing as far as like this, and Francisco, you talked about it's not just the things, but the connections, the dependencies on the things. So what are we seeing as best practices?
So I think that traceability is the key, the traceability of decisions. And so if I think about this too, about, agents calling agents calling agents, and, at what point does it call DeepSeek or a Chinese model that you don't realize is embedded in that decision tree? And you could think if a service is down, if I have an agent calling an expert that is not available, then it goes to something else to find the same answer. How do I know that I have a trusted source of information for the response? I don't, right? Unless I've got traceability, unless I've got constraints, I've got governance around all of those things. I've put controls in place and I can measure. And so having deterministic controls around non-deterministic systems. If you think about how do I manage people? How do I manage agents when they may go awry? How do I manage potential insider threats? All of these same thoughts and practices you have to really adopt for this world of AI and agentic AI.
On my side, what I would like to mention is that what we see is, of course, and we go probably into inventories and where do we keep track of all of these assets. But then the big challenge I see on this layer is I come from the security operations incident response red teaming background, been there a few years, and the fastest of the tools that I could see were security orchestration and automation tools for being able to contain very fast threat, right? Now we know that the dwell time has been shrinking to near zero now. When I was in that business was maybe 16 days, so it was relatively easy back then. But then once you initiated a containment action, say bring down the whole forest in this region, right? Which means bring down the domain controllers and take a number of steps. That was a security action, not necessarily a resiliency action, right? But now what we see is very wild deployments of agents and tools that are AI enabled, but yet we don't see the same speed in recoverability efforts, right? So before, again, with SOAR tools, like you could find a way which decision was taken, where was it taken on, and then what can be rolled back, right? Now it's very difficult to define. I'm not sure there's clear standards on this yet. We will see them coming. It's what does known good mean for AI tools, right? Again, here I talk about configuration, versioning, and I got a small list right here, like immutable snapshots, training data as well, embeddings, weighting for the models, for the decision making. And all of this means, so what I would encourage every listener here, again, go back to your teams and ask what does known good mean for the AI tools, whether it's the tool, the layer, the cognitive part or so, and then how critical are them, right? Again, the inventory is one piece, the criticality is another piece. And again, in the way how we define criticality of AI systems and AI information assets is cannot be just based on what the business believes is most critical, but we need to account for the adversarial view on those systems. So how valuable is that specific system for an adversary as well, right? That could potentially weaponize the system against you.
And that prioritization is a whole other discussion about, vulnerability and risk management, because, and again, AI kind of expands that footprint and the surface area of that, and the non-deterministic aspect, because I think that the reality of the answer is it's individual to, what is baseline and what does good look like and what does quality look like, knowing that it may change in 2 weeks when a new model is released that it is relying on, or an update happens, or there's some kind of drift or new context isn't put in place. And so that becomes kind of the challenge is that, though it's also not unlike managing people. We're very non-deterministic ourselves, but we just have to, it's a transition going from that. And so the other thing that was kind of brought up was about third parties and whether or not, whether we like it, our third parties are all using AI, and are we relying on them and their understanding all this? Because you're right, Francesco, it's like resilience hasn't really been talked about as much. We don't have people who've identified it, and yet there are companies who traditionally you pick any platform, SaaS platform that we're using, they all have AI modules doing something. It's like, how well and how consistent is that? So what are we seeing in third-party observation, risk, and managing resiliency with our third parties, as well as the models themselves being that third party?
I think on this one, I would say maybe a couple of things from a readiness standpoint, right? And I've seen amazing resilience programs fail because some of the simple things, in fact, around third parties, have not been taken care of. And one of the simplest one is even myself pick up the phone and call this third party critical provider of technology and see if they pick up the phone as per contract, right? Then obviously, if you're a big organization, maybe you have 100,000 people, who knows how many third parties you have? It's going to be in the hundreds, if not sometimes in the thousands. And the ability to define what of these third parties are the critical ones, that's the first step, right? Again, a core concept of resilience is that you focus on what matters most. So again, I want to encourage our audience to focus on this and define, in light of a lot of confusion on many of the systems we're now deploying and the third parties we bring in, look at what's most critical. Then obviously, once you know which third parties are most critical, you need to identify, as Mark mentioned before, what are the failure modes. So what is going to happen once the concentration risk on one third party, suddenly explodes and you have a high priority incident you need to deal with? Who are you going to call? What will they actually do? Do you have even an incident response retainer or a cyber recovery retainer that is able to analyze, AI relevant data from their platforms, whether they are just part of a supply chain, or if they are a provider, then simple things like, do you have the SLAs in place? This still holds. These are the first discussions I would encourage to look at. And there's one element I would like to throw in the discussion, which is as part of research we recently ran at Rubrik, we found out that in the last few months, the confidence in recoverability, whether first party, third or fourth party related, at enterprise level from the leaders that we surveyed, had a double-digit drop just in the last nearly half a year. It means that things are quite serious, and in the moment when we're deploying faster than the security teams can keep up and the resilience team can actually inspect what's being implemented, then we have a serious problem. So again, I think the speed of deployment and the speed of autonomy needs to find reflection into the level of trust that we implement. If that trust level is almost inexistent, then there may be a moment when, for the sake of the greater resilience of our organization, we may even need to say no, right?
Yeah, I would. So first of all, I think when we think about concentration risk and we think about what are the biggest organizations we depend upon, the cloud service providers and so now it'll be AI frontier model providers, right? So there are systemic dependencies, and the problem there is when when something does go wrong, 10,000 or 100,000 companies are calling at the same time. So how are they able to respond to that? So one of the things that we've done in our Business Resilience Council is create a cross-sector collaboration space, right, where, for instance, when CrowdStrike occurred, within an hour we had a cross-sector chat that was buzzing with activity. Within a few hours we had a call. By 4 p.m. I was on the phone with the CEO of CrowdStrike, and a couple of days later we had CrowdStrike present to all ISACs, what the problem was and what people need to do about it in a trusted circle, in a trusted forum. So being able to do that, and you can't exercise with every one of your vendors and suppliers, certainly not the biggest ones. They can't exercise with 10,000 of their organizations. So you also need that common space where you can go through resilience exercises with those important third parties. And so we do these exercises like the one that we just mentioned. So that's, one thing is making sure that your vendors and suppliers are part of a collective defense community. And number two is making sure that you're participating and they're participating in these cross-sector exercises so you can test resilience, test your ability to, how will you be impacted by a systemic impact event and how will you respond together? How can you recover together? What are those the dependencies that need to be tested? So that's one thing that I think every organization should do. That's it's pretty new. I'm sort of leaning into this idea of collective resilience that I haven't really seen represented in any other place.
Yeah, I think that, and you bring up a great point about the community support. And when you were kind of mentioning, I'm like, oh, we almost need like an AI ISAC, but but then it's an overlay because you use the example of CrowdStrike a couple years ago where you worked with all the ISACs and had, briefings together. So it does overlay because it's a shared service, it's shared technology that we all use, not shared and using the same one, but it's something that's impacted by all. So that's a really interesting perspective. And certainly in things that Francesco had mentioned and you as well, is that these are all still foundational things in our security programs, right? Francesco talked about prioritization of your third parties. Yes, that's a fundamental thing that we've been doing. AI may change that, because we became more reliant on when we didn't. If we only updating it once a year, things move so quickly that we didn't realize that this now becomes real important to us, because we haven't the year hasn't ended up yet where we had to restack them. And going back to the communications channels and who we reach out to and support and get that insight will also kind of change. Yeah, I think, Francesco, you brought up a very good point that I want to kind of dig into a little bit more, is the velocity of implementation, and that we're getting beyond our control and governance. A lot of folks, and I brief lots of boards and I work with lots of organizations, and what I'm seeing mostly in the US is this fear of being left behind, and the boards saying, do something because we don't want to be left behind. It was like, we're not giving you the strategy, we're not giving you the plan, we're just saying you need to do something because I'm worried about it. That I'm not seeing outside of the US. I think there's a lot more prudency of them, let's figure out how this is going to transform the business. Let's figure out what the real impact, what the real things that we want to impact. Are we increasing revenue, increasing margin, increasing customer retention? What is it that we want to get out of this? Not just being more efficient. And I think because of that push is exactly what you said, Francesco, is we're getting beyond our governance, and then people overcompensate by putting in these what honestly is bureaucracy disguised as governance, by putting the human in every single loop and wondering why they're not being successful as Silicon Valley companies who just have humans on the loop, not in the loop. So what do you think about that impact of the risk of the velocity of stress of trying to implement?
First of all, there's compared to cloud projects that we all handled a few years back. I was in charge as cloud security officer for one of the first clouds out there. It was at the Hewlett-Packard Times. And so I saw it firsthand, how these projects and transformations actually came along. Typically, the CIOs needed to justify quite heavily why should we move to an innovation like cloud environments, right? Now with AI, the paradigm is different. The business asks you as CIO or CISO, why are you not using AI tools, right? This changes a lot how things then are done. In Europe, I've seen in different recent communities, many operating models from CISOs and CIOs, especially from the critical infrastructure sector and energy, where there are AI fusion teams, which in a nutshell is, you may be familiar with the cyber fusion concept, which was basically an evolved way of doing security operations centers, and been implementing these models, back in my manufacturing times at Pepsi. Now I see this clear analogy where the traditional IT organization needs to now evolve into an AI fusion type of organization, bringing security in, bringing the data and infrastructure teams in, and then bringing as well the business in. If you think about it, it's a simple concept. I'm sure we will see more on AI fusion teams going forward. And in terms of the speed, I would say I can call out a recent analysis that we ran with the Economist Enterprise magazine, and the title was "Power Without Control." Right. So most of the organizations that were surveyed had already faced a disruptive event of some sort related to AI and agents, particularly. But yet only 30% of these were aware that they need to test, and they need to define what recovery means for these situations, right? So again, the traditional, preparation, protection, and then recovery, we already know that the percentage of investment on recovery has always been historically very low compared to the investment on prevention and protection. The reason being that it has always been difficult for leaders to justify, this is like we're preparing for the black swan event. It will happen in 10 years maybe. So I think that rather than just talking speed, I would really encourage leaders to think about the showing to their boards that the materialization of this severe and extreme threat is very easy to quantify nowadays. And if you're not confident with the recovery after such a severe event, well, then I would suggest pause every implementation and just get control over this. The one keyword I see on the most mature boards out there that are implementing AI is actually reversibility. So the ability to really, adapt and evolve. And back to my closing point on this one, back to the collective resilience concept that Mark mentioned before. I think some of the most resilient organizations that I've seen are not necessarily the ones, again, with the most shiny tools, but are the ones which, during the CrowdStrike outage of a couple of years back, even if they didn't have the tool implemented, they were using the lessons learned and the continuous improvement process, right? And they were saying, okay, what if it happened to us? What if a kernel level tool like CrowdStrike in that case would be in our environment? And then suddenly they started auditing all of their processes, all of their tools. They would run scripts. They would identify. So this concept of learning from others before it happens to you is very simple yet very powerful.
So yeah, there's a couple of things that during the discussion came to mind, and so there's a lot of great work. You mentioned that Mythos paper, Cloud Security Alliance, SANS, OWASP sort of came together and wrote the Mythos Ready Security paper, and just had some in-person events a few weeks back to then I think extend that and sort of refine it. I'm not sure if the update has come out yet, but there were two things that Sunil, you mentioned on our call a couple of weeks ago about discussions that came up during those in-person sessions, and one was just high velocity, right? We've all become high velocity engineering organizations, and we must adapt our security and resilience practices to match. And I think about sort of the chaos monkey approach and like, fail all the time often so that you can test your recovery often, right? And make sure that, I think at the business process level that you're resilient. They also brought up this human in the loop, human in the loop, human on the loop, right? Governance in the loop, governance on loop. So, we if we're operating quickly, if we need sort of governance at speed as well, speed and scale as well. And what does that mean? And are there ways that we can, minimize the amount of human in the loop, right? So we're doing sort of on the loop, we're looking for anomalous activity, and then we're sort of diving into the things that look strange. So really thinking about these models that are approaches that are gonna help us, put controls that operate also at speed and scale, and then pull us in, right, and elevate it to some higher level alert when we need it, and when we need to come in and apply human judgment and decision making.
Yeah, and as you're saying, a lot of these are not new things. If your endpoints are all locked up, whether it's because they're blue screened or because they're ransomware, we should have a process to recover from that. If your application goes down, whether because it's DDoSed, whether it's just some flaky thing happened, or whether your agent deleted the production database, we should have a plan for that. So a lot of it comes back to the fundamentals. The other thing that, going back to non-deterministic is, I wrote an article about how your agents do not have to listen to you. You can have all these controls and skills files and measurements and limitations, but it'll still, just like the humans, will do what it needs to do to get the job done. And it will go around your controls to do that if it's important enough. And so we need to at least understand that it's not like it was before where we've segmented it. It was like, oh no, it may figure out, again, like, humans. And I always said my second rule for being a CISO is don't make your users your biggest hackers. And if if they have to go around your controls to do your job, you failed. Same thing with agents. So one of the other areas I want to talk about is data and data quality and data integrity. And I had famously written a couple of, been on in articles and papers talking about the three things needed for a successful AI implementation is data quality, data quality, data quality, because where we've been able to kind of compensate for it as humans to say, well, let me adjust this. Okay, this looks right and goes. AI is just going to take whatever comes in and run with it. And when I really say data quality three times, it's, it's all complete and it's accurate and it's up to date, that there is context related to it. So I know that the number of customers in, sales is different than the number of customers in the finance finance application, and they're different numbers, but they're both correct for that context, and that the workflow that they're supporting is up to date, accurate, and the humans are there. And so we've really kind of an advantage of AI has been that we've all had to focus on data governance, which we've kind of like happily ignored for years. And so, and that also includes with third parties and things we're sharing with third parties, things we're receiving from third parties. So I didn't know if you have any, if you have any like insights or things about like the data element of this as well, because it doesn't work unless you have the data.
Yeah, Francesco, I'm sure you're gonna have a lot to say about this, but a couple of things that jumped to mind. So when we developed this operational resilience framework, we were thinking, and Sunil, you has a model too, where you sort of get to the recovery part, and nobody sort of thought about that from the solution space. But because of regulatory pressures, and you think about data and backing up data, it's been all around sort of your PII, your business data. And there's, somebody in a back room writing a script to like back up all the other stuff, the network configurations and the, Active Directory and all the other things that you need to ensure that are backed up to restore your systems. I think it's the same here, and we talk about AI and recovering AI to some known state. What does that mean? It's a lot more nuanced than just like, hey, I have an app, I got to turn it back on, right? I need to make sure that I'm returning to some known state, that my prompts, my sources, my guardrails, my permissions, all the things that I have, the existing controls are activated, right? That everything's back to a previously known state. So, ensuring that we're able to do that, or, just fail over to some other system, right, in an appropriate way, is something that we need to build into these systems.
From my standpoint, yeah, before I talk about the depth on data governance, data protection, that is massive. I think we're dealing with a threat depth as well, right? So even when we look at prominent databases that store key vulnerabilities, we see that that they almost stop tracking, many of them. Like there's been an exponential growth, like 100 times more velocity in discovering threats. And so again, most of the community the communities that I speak to, they talk a lot about the threat. The threat is super fast, observability is low. How can we deal with these new incidents? It's all valid, right? But then, rightly so, we have a big depth on governance for data. There's still so many organizations that don't know where their PII resides, unfortunately. A lot of shadow data, floating around. Now, data loss prevention now is a very challenging topic, because if before there were like the number of incidents related to DLP has grown a lot, now as well AI can help rebuild a lot of materials, intellectual property, without bypassing completely all the security controls. And then as well, being able to find where the critical data resides typically is after action or a post factum, once security incidents has happened. And I think when we talk though about the recovery aspects of a severe threat, it's nearly never just about the data. In fact, having a viable copy of the data is one element, but then you need to rebuild the whole application around it, right? And you need to then ensure that this happens jointly with the users or the identities that then need to, be able to work and restart the business process. So I think going to encourage cyber resilience leaders and IT leaders out there to really think about what does how does the time to reboot the organization look like? And this implies not just the traditional RTO or RPO that they have for their regular business processes, but it's about having a cyber RTO and cyber RPO, which includes restoring, of course, the various applications, the platforms, having a restart sequencing framework for that, and then as well being able to recover the data. In case of AI threats, we know that the speed at which data can be deleted is like ridiculously fast, and I would say it's very illogical when I look at some strategies nowadays for organizations to to take so lightly the level of unpredictability that has been introduced by some of the AI tools and systems that we see. So we cannot ignore that level of unpredictability. But as a result, we need to see much faster strategies and investments that allow us to deal with the gap that this prevention has created. Now, obviously, security as prevention as we know today is completely dead. And in light of this unpredictability, we must ensure that we invest into the reversibility, right, of our processes and of our systems.
Yeah, I think just one more thing to add here when we talk about data is that, AI can generate synthetic data that looks very similar to your existing data. So I need to make sure that I trust the data, that it's restored, right? That's not, even if I'm restoring from a backup, is it actually the data that I thought was being restored? Like, how can I test that and understand that that I can trust that data? And then, elevating that to the application business process level, can I trust this business process as I restore it?
Yeah, and as we said at the very beginning, the resiliency is that, the systems are available and accurate and able to be used. And if the data is corrupted in any way, intentionally, unintentionally, accidentally, it doesn't matter. We're not going to be able to do what we need to do. And interesting, Francisco, you kind of brought DLP. DLP has changed. I see a lot of AI observability tools that focus a lot on DLP because it's expanded not just from humans sending stuff, but to agents communicating with themselves or without. So one last question, then one last topic, and then we'll have our final question. And the topic is on accountability. We cannot transfer accountability to AI. I use the example of, if your dog bites somebody, it's not the dog's fault, it's your fault. You are the steward of the dog, and it's your responsibility to make sure. So I can't, pass on, my governance load, my legal liability. I can't pass that to agents, even if they're all, no matter how autonomous they are and how smart they may be. We don't have laws to be able to sue agents, just people. And so that kind of accountability is an important thing. And our regulators want to be able to see that we have auditable, we talked about auditable process. We can recover from mistakes or errors or performance lacks to be able to maintain this resiliency. So what are our thoughts on the accountability aspect in resiliency?
From a regulatory standpoint, the question is going to be who is accountable for that specific agent or AI system or model. And they will ask as well another key question, which is what's your evidence to be able to say, what has happened, right? So unfortunately, I like there's so much that we need to do on the foundational topics that I don't see at all any maturity levels in this space, right? There's just so much to do on governance and on recovery that this would be almost like the next step and the next advancements from what I see. The first part would be again, ensuring that there's at least an accountable officer for all of this. And what we see is definitely organizations lacking a resilience officer in the first place. This is typically fragmented. You got either it's the business continuity team owning it, or either it's the CISO. Rarely I see I always see like information security and risk and compliance organizations, but I rarely see information security, resilience, and compliance as one. So that's the first operating model that needs to change. So hopefully by doing that, we will have a clearer view of accountability, and then as a result, a clear view of the evidence that is required to prove the accountability. So I'm sorry I don't have a too strong answer on this one, but hopefully Mark does.
Well, no, I think, we going along the same line of what you're saying, we defined a role in our operational resilience framework as an operational resilience executive, right? Somebody who sort of manages the operational resilience program and ensures that we can recover. But I think, you're getting to, decisions, right? And preserving the decisions that were made, by humans and then ultimately, by agents. But if like you're saying, is that the agents aren't going to be necessarily sued for the decisions they make. But then how do you, maintain that? How do you ensure that you have that evidence so that later you can go back and do a forensic analysis and make sure that you don't make those kinds of mistakes going forward. So even those decision making, the decision lineage, what model is being used, what prompts are being used, what data is being retrieved. Um, those records also must be protected and stored in an immutable distributed format so that you can recover that later, and it's not part of the data that gets destroyed in some impactful event. That you can understand how that originated.
Yeah, I've only seen in talking with boards, I've seen Australia has really kind of set the standard of require, boards of directors are accountable for, because they have their fiduciary duty of the stewards being the stewards for the organization. If AI does something wrong, it's still their fault. So final question, and then we'll wrap up, is, in the future, as we kind of talked about, we will expect to see AI agents do a lot more autonomous things and a lot more, making decisions, which causes the accountability discussion in the first place. So what is one resilience kind of like preparation, that we want to invest in today to prepare for that future as we need to transform our business for this new world?
I would go with two super quick insights. So first of all, autonomy must scale with trust, right? So you don't rebuild or reboot your company after a destructive event if you can't trust what you're building, right? The same goes now, like the speed has changed, the complexity has changed, but this still holds. And then again, we see 100 times bigger opportunity with AI projects, which causes leaders to push this project forward. But then we see 100 times bigger risks, and the majority, 90% at least, of these companies don't have the right measures in place yet because of the speed. So I think it is really logical to ignore recovery and reversibility of these processes, right? That's why you need, again, as was said earlier, immutability. You need to ensure that the resumption, meaning identities, and then the rollback of these actions. So that's what I would say is top of mind for the resilience leaders I speak with.
Yeah, I think this idea of runtime controllability. So, you need to make sure you've got a kill switch, right? You can rapidly constrain it. So you need unique identities, you need least privilege, you need, human approval for high impact actions. You need to be able to like revoke credentials and kill processes if they're going astray. Um, Isolation, disconnect, reconnect. So I think it's all about runtime control and your ability to quickly enact those controls.
That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank everybody for the attendance. And Francesco and Mark, thank you very much for this great discussion on AI resilience, and hope everyone has a great day.